Laura, is the White House listening to these Americans? And how much pressure are they getting from countries outside of the U.S., our foreign allies, to outline objectives in this war as it roils global markets?
Well, right now, the president and those in the White House are clearly standing by these actions, by the strikes, despite the fact that polling, as you note, Anna, as well as those comments that we're hearing from voters, they're not necessarily behind this war. They're not behind these actions. They already were feeling pain in a number of areas, not just at the gas pump. But when it comes to also our allies, they want answers as well. They want to know exactly what the objectives are. And broadly, the administration has outlined some objectives like destroying the Navy, wanting to ensure that the ballistic missile capability of Iran is wiped out. But again, there still aren't enough answers, whether there are people here at home hearing them or our allies. And you've seen some of that play out over the last week, where UK's Prime Minister Keir Starmer had initially said that UK bases were not going to be able to be used by the US. They ultimately were, but President Trump was not happy with this back and forth with the UK, saying that if allies didn't want to join the U.S. from the beginning as they did these strikes, then they wouldn't necessarily need their help. There's also been tensions with Spain, where Spain did not want to allow U.S. planes to be landing in bases there as well. But this is something that we're seeing play out as a number of European allies want more answers from the administration, Anna.
Josh, over the weekend, Israel targeted Iran's oil facilities for the first time in this war. Those oil facilities are critical infrastructure for the region. How are we seeing the ripple effects? What are the potential ramifications?
Oh, the ramifications, Anna, are enormous for the region and, in fact, for the world as oil prices, as we've been talking about, continue to skyrocket. In fact, none other than Lindsey Graham, the a staunch supporter of Israel and of President Trump, tweeted at the Israeli government, basically pleading with them to show some restraint, be cautious, he said, about what targets you select. He, of course, framed it in the terms of trying to preserve Iranian infrastructure for when the people might be able to take over their government. But of course, there's a pragmatic reason here as well, because just in the last 24 hours, it's clearly become deeply escalatory in this region. Iran now targeting oil facilities in Bahrain, here in the UAE, and in Saudi Arabia, and all of this with this oil price crisis continuing to mount. So the escalation really cannot be overstated. Anna.
Bobby, of course, the U.S. hasn't presented any kind of timeline for this war, nor has Israel. How much do you think the oil situation is increasing pressure on President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu to do so?
Well, as the president has said, this is a temporary thing. He's argued that this is a price worth paying. We'll see as the week sort of plays out, as these prices continue to rise, and they're almost certain to continue to rise, whether American taxpayers support this idea that this is a price worth paying. We saw a few clips at the top of the segment suggesting that they do not. And the president's approval ratings are not moving at all. I have not seen this happen in my lifetime, where America has gone to a war, and there has been no rallying to the flag by the American people. Even wars that eventually proved to be highly unpopular at the start of those wars, the Iraq War, which I covered extensively, at the start of the war, the support for the president, Bush Jr., then was enormous. There was a lot of support. Bush Jr. was able to get an international coalition, the Coalition of the Willing, who went in alongside the United States. There were Iraqi opposition groups that were supporting the effort. It was long planned, arguably well planned, but nobody planned for the day after. In this case, there does not seem to have been any planning for the day of the conflict, never mind the day after. And none of this sort of bodes well for how it's going to go. As I said, we've had reports from the White House suggesting the president is surprised by how the Iranians have held up and held out and continue to attack. He should not be surprised. This is not a surprise to anyone who's been paying any attention to the region. At least his advisors should have been very clear with him, suggesting, if you go into this war, this is what's going to happen. The Iranians are going to close the Straits of Hormuz. Nearly 20% of the world's oil supply travel through those straits. The Iranians are going to attack oil installations, not just in the immediate neighborhood countries, but one country over. And that's going to raise the price of oil. And it's going to go to three figures and continue to rise until such time the fighting stops. The president really shouldn't be surprised. And we should not be experiencing this shock of oil prices.
Would you expect Iran eventually to blink first?
Well, the new leader the Iranians have chosen, Mojtaba Khamenei, his father and wife were just killed 3 or 5 days ago. That does not suggest that he's going to give up anytime soon. He's got a personal grudge in addition to the sort of institutional and ideological grudge. He's a hardliner. He's the hardest of hardliners. This is not the sort of person who you would expect to stand down. And there's nothing so far to suggest that the Iranian regime is suing for peace. There have been some apologies that have been made to some of the neighboring countries, but those apologies don't really hold up because they've continued to attack those neighboring countries. So the regime is certainly weakened when you take out the top leader, and not just one leader, but 40 of the top leadership in one blow. That's going to weaken the regime. It has been weakened. But there's nothing to suggest that weakening is the same thing as defeating. This is this is not a dictatorship in the way that we've seen in other countries. This is not a matter of removing one man from the top. There are institutions, there are redundancies built into these institutions. If one man is taken out, there's another. If that person's taken out, there's another, and another, and another. There's a clear succession plan. I would not, again, based on what we've seen in previous conflicts in the Middle East, I would not be betting my house against the idea that the Iranians are going to blink anytime soon.
Of course, Laura, the president called Mojtaba Khamenei an unacceptable choice. Any sense of what the White House is prepared to do about it?
That's right, Anna. He also called him a lightweight. But when it comes to what exactly the president or the administration wants to do, again, they speak in generalities. They give kind of vague statements. The president saying that ultimately he wants to be a part of this decision. He wanted to be a part of who would become the next supreme leader, saying that the person would have to have his approval. And he also said that if they don't have his approval, then, you know, he doesn't necessarily want to have to go back into Iran or continue the military action. But that's kind of the general answers we've gotten from the president, which is if it is someone he doesn't like, then he may be willing to have this military action continue to be ongoing and to potentially take out any subsequent leader. Again, the president compares this a lot to Venezuela, saying that he's not necessarily, it doesn't necessarily have to be a regime change, but that he wants someone in there who he approves of and who he likes, Anna.
Josh, I know there's been a steady barrage of missiles and drones targeting the same area you're in. And just this morning, we learned NATO defenses intercepted a second ballistic missile that was headed toward Turkey. How much is the scale and just creep of this war really intensifying?
Yeah, you know, Anna, that really raises the stakes, right? A NATO member, of course, that brings in the prospect of European nations being pulled into this thing, NATO being pulled into this thing. But really across the Gulf nations, which had been trying to stay on the sidelines, are incandescent with rage about what has been happening over the last week. It's just been a relentless barrage of lethality in the air over their nations from Iran. There might possibly be good news that today, for the first day, UAE reported that it saw only 18 attack drones, intercepting 17 of them every day for the last several days. That number has been well over 100. How do you read that? Is that maybe scaling back? Is it just a fluke for one day? I guess we'll find out tomorrow. But obviously, this region, to what you said earlier, Anna, is just hoping someone blinks before more of these countries get more heavily involved.
Bobby, the U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth is warning this is really just the beginning and says there will be more casualties. Let's listen.
The president's been right to say there will be casualties. Things like this don't happen without casualties. There will be more casualties. And no one is, I mean, especially our generation knows what it's like to see Americans come home in caskets. But that doesn't weaken us one bit. It stiffens our spine and our resolve to say this is a fight we will finish.
And he didn't rule out American boots on the ground. I mean, just in the last few days, We've seen more casualties. Israel reporting first members of its military killed in this war happened in Lebanon. There were civilians lost in Saudi Arabia. And of course, you know, hundreds of people, innocent civilians killed in Iran through all of this. What's your sense of how all this is unfolding in the region? Comments like that from Hegseth, how that's received?
Well, we've already seen mission creep take place, right? This was meant to be, if you go back some weeks, this was meant to be, President Trump's first stated objective was to help the protesters in Iran. Then it became about regime change. First, it was going to be just a matter of a few days of bombing from the air, and then it would be all done. Now we're talking about weeks, possibly months. And not just Hegseth, others have refused to rule out putting boots on the ground. This is classic mission creep. We've seen this play out again and again and again. And the trouble is, it's okay to say that, look, when you're in a war, soldiers will die. This is unambiguously true. But usually when you go into a war, you communicate clearly to your people why it is their sons and daughters in the armed forces are going to make the sacrifice. Why is it that we're at war with this country, and why now? It's not enough to say that, well, the Iranian regime are bad guys. They've been bad guys for a very long time. And just last year, the Israelis, with our help, bombed, as the president said, obliterated Iran's nuclear facilities. Now you're saying we're going back to war with the same country. You have not explained to the American people why it is we're at war. So when American soldiers pay the ultimate price and come home in caskets, it is completely reasonable for Americans to ask, what's going on here? Why are our boys and girls being put to this ultimate sacrifice? That's a reasonable question to ask, and the administration has not answered it.